Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. In this 13th episode of the summary of the Quran, we are going to do 4 surahs. We've started the third group of Quranic surahs, and in the last 2 episodes, we did 2 surahs each. This episode, we are going to do 4 more. We'll start from Surah Ibrahim, followed by Surah Al-Hijr. These 2 surahs, 14 and 15, form a pair. And then we'll move on to Nahl and Bani Israel, which again are a pair. So let's begin with picking a few verses from Surah Ibrahim. Surah Ibrahim is the 14th surah of the Quran. It begins with A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alif Lam Ra. Kitabun anzalnahu ilayka litukhrijan nasa minaz zulumati ilan nur. Like Surah Al-Hijr, Ibrahim too begins with Alif Lam Ra, which I have been mentioning is an indication, one indication of the fact that these 2 surahs are a pair, they form a pair. It says, this is a book, that is the Quran, which we have revealed to you so that you bring out humans from darkness to light. Minaz zulumati ilan nur, darkness of ignorance, of incorrect, misleading beliefs, towards the light of knowledge, of the right beliefs. Bi-izni rabbihim, by the permission of their Lord. Nobody can believe without the Almighty's leave, permission. Ila siratil aziz al-hamid, to the path of the mighty and the praiseworthy. So that's pretty much the purpose of all God's messages, that people come to learn about what the truth is, and not just their beliefs, but their practices also become pure and free from all corruptions. Corruption is what has been the specialization of Satan, the devil, Iblis, who disagreed with the Almighty right from day one when humans embarked upon their journey. Iblis refused to bow down to Adam, and as a consequence, he was thrown out from the august assembly and the privileged people, and he decided that he is going to be the enemy of human beings. He was arrogant. So this enmity is going to continue until the day of judgment. The Quran tells us that on the day of judgment, Satan would make a statement. He would say, وَقَالَ الشَّيْطَانُ لَمَّا قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ, and Satan will say when the matter shall be concluded. That is, when all decisions regarding who is going to get what, whose destiny is going to be where, Satan is going to say then, God promised you a true promise, and I also promised too, but I broke it. But I didn't have any authority over you except that I invited you, and you accepted my invitation. So don't blame me, but blame yourself. فَلَا تَلُومُونِي وَلُومُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Neither can I come to your rescue, nor can you come to my rescue. So, in other words, the Almighty is telling us that this friendship that some people have with Satan, they don't realize that it's going to end up in disaster. Neither they nor Satan are going to succeed, and they will not be able to do anything even if they would blame each other. Then we go to verse 37, wherein we are informed, as is the title of the Surah Ibrahim, that Ibrahim alayhi salam, after he had raised the walls of, constructed the Kaaba along with his son Ismail, he then prayed to the Almighty and said, Rabbana inni askantu min zurriyati biwadin ghairi zi zar. Our Lord, I have settled my progeny in an uncultivated valley near your sacred house. Our Lord, that they may establish prayer. So it was not just that the house was constructed, the progeny of Abraham was also settled there. But obviously, the problem was that there wasn't anything in the environment that was conducive for enabling humans to live there. No cultivation was possible, water wasn't available, and so on. So, realizing that it's going to be a problem and knowing fully well that the Almighty Himself had asked Abraham to construct the house and then settle his progeny in that area, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he prayed to the Almighty, so incline the hearts of people towards them and provide for them from fruits of crops so that they may be grateful. And that is exactly how it happened. This prayer was fully heard. And that is, by the way, what happens in the case of prayers. The Almighty has His own plans. He allows humans to realize that these plans are there. They have a feeling, very strong feeling, and they pray to the Almighty, and the Almighty obliges. But there's one more thing that we notice in this verse, and that is that this prayer suggests that Ibrahim alayhi salam asked the Almighty to provide his progeny is going to now settle in that place, Mecca. From then onwards, they need to be taken care of. And the time when he prayed, Ismail was grown up. He was 14, 15 years old. So, what about the story that he was there as a toddler, as somebody who was in a few months old? Not even that, he was. Obviously, there is a serious question about it, because when the real settling of the family was done at the time when the house was constructed, then there is a serious question mark as to how could it be claimed that they settled much earlier, 14, 15 years earlier. But that's not mentioned in the Quran, and therefore it's a matter that needs to be revisited. Now we move on to the next surah, which is Surah Al-Hijr, the partner surah of Surah Ibrahim. It also begins with Alif Lam Ra. Inna nahnu nazzalna zikra wa inna lahu lahafizun is the most famous verse of this surah, which is verse 9. The Almighty has declared in this verse His decision that the Quran is going to be fully preserved. It's not going to be allowed to be available for people to corrupt it, alter it, like it happened in the case of the earlier books. Not that the earlier books were not important, they were equally important. But the fact of the matter is that in the case of the earlier books that the Almighty had revealed, He also had this plan that prophets would keep coming. So if there was any change, corruption introduced in the text, prophets would correct them. And therefore, there wouldn't be any serious damage done. However, when in the case of the last prophet, may God's mercy be on him, and the Quran, it was decided that it's going to be the very last time that the Almighty would send a prophet. Therefore, it was important that the text be fully preserved, and that's what the Almighty is saying in this verse. And it indeed was fully preserved. It got memorized. A large number of people memorized the same text. The Quran was read in prayers, and when the first generation left this world, first generation of the companions, the Muslims, then the second generation already had a larger number of people who had memorized the Quran, and all of them were saying their prayers and reading and reciting the Quran out of their memory 5 times a day. And this process has never ended. So the Quran was intact right from day one, and it's the same very Quran that we read even today. We move on to verse 49 onwards, and we find that the Almighty is narrating the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he is visited by angels. In that particular story, the Almighty, when he is mentioning that story, he says, Nabbi ibadi anni anal ghafurur rahim. Inform my servants that I am forgiving, merciful. Wanna azabi huwal azabul alim. But my punishment is a painful punishment. So the Almighty has both these sides to him simultaneously. He's extremely caring, loving, forgiving, and he is strong and firm while getting rid of those who are enemies, who are not prepared to accept the message. He is very firm against them. So he says, وَنَبِّهُمْ عَنْ ضَيْفِ Ibrahim, and inform them about the guests of Abraham, the angels, who were a good example of how the Almighty at the same time, while being kind and merciful, is also firm against those who go wrong. Because it were the same angels who, on the one hand, gave the good news of a son to Ibrahim and his wife, who were both too old for them to ordinarily have a son, a child. But they got this good news through the angels. But the same angels were also asked to go to Lut and his nation so that they be destroyed because of their misdeeds. So that's why the Almighty begins by saying, tell my servants that I am forgiving and merciful, and tell them that my punishment is going to be severe punishment. Then we move on to verses 87 and 88 of Surah Al-Hijr. And this verse also has got to do with the Quran, the way it's arranged by the Almighty. The Quran, the Almighty tells the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, is the book that he should focus his attention on. It's the blessing of the Almighty that should enable him and his companions to not worry about what people are doing to them and not look at the worldly grandeur and glamour that's there for distracting them. So the Quran says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَاكَ سَبْعًا مِنَ الْمَثَانِي وَالْقُرْآنِ الْعَظِيمِ. O Prophet, we have given you 7 comprising of pairs, that is the glorious Quran. Don't even raise your eyes to look at the worldly possessions we have given them, nor grieve at their condition. However, extend your comforting arms over the believers. So, focus on the Quran and its brilliance, and you would find that the Quran is giving you sufficient comfort and contentment for you to not care for anything else, neither for the opposition and enmity of these disbelievers, nor to look at the worldly attractions that they have been provided with. You will find more consolation and value in the Quran. But while describing the Quran, the great treasure, the great blessing of the Almighty that was given to the Prophet and the companions, the Almighty says that He has given you 7 comprising of pairs, Sabam min al-Mathani, Wal Quran al-Azim. That is the glorious Quran. So the glorious Quran, Al-Quran al-Azim, has been described by the Quran itself as 7 in pairs. And that's exactly what we have been talking about, that the Quran has 7 surah groups, and each group has a number of surahs which are in pairs. So, Sab'am min al-Mathani. These are 7 comprising of pairs. So, the Quran is comprised of 7 groups of surahs, and there are 54 pairs, that is 108 surahs out of 114 are in the form of pairs. This is something that the Almighty had already mentioned in the Quran before it was completely revealed, that that's how the Quran is going to look like when it's going to be completed and then rearranged in the form that it is now. After these 2 surahs, which are one pair, we begin another pair, which is the pair of Surah An-Nahl and Surah Bani Israel. Quite apart from some other messages in Surah An-Nahl, what we find is that this surah is a brilliant description of God's blessings. If somebody wants to look at the blessings of the Almighty the way He Himself has described, quite apart from some other surahs, Surah An-Nahl would be one that I would strongly recommend. This surah partners with Surah Bani Israel, the next one, the 17th one. This is the 16th surah. For a number of reasons. There are a number of features in these 2 surahs which put together make them a pair. One is that in both surahs you would find that there is a mention of hijrah, migration, which happened from Mecca to Medina. While in Surah An-Nahl we will find that the indication is a bit in the form of early indication. In Surah Bani Israel, it's pretty much detailed. We do find that this surah is, both surahs are talking about the Jews. Although in Surah An-Nahl the discussion is just initiated, while in Surah Bani Israel there are considerable details. And the same is the case with mention of the moral principles, ethics and morality. We'll find that in Surah An-Nahl the description is brief, and in Bani Israel it's detailed. So that's the kind of relationship that we see the 2 surahs are bound in. So we start with Surah An-Nahl, and as I said, that it describes the Almighty's blessings in considerable detail. In verse 18 we find, verse 5 to 7 we find, and He has created grazing animals, wal an'am khalaqaha, for you. In them is arrangement for warmth and numerous other benefits, and you eat from their flesh too. And for you is beauty in them when you bring their flocks back in the evening, and when you take them for pasturing in the morning. And they carry your loads to a land where you could not have reached yourself except with difficulty. We do have these blessings with us. We do make use of them every day, but on most occasions we don't realize. We take them for granted. What the Quran does is that it makes us realize that these blessings indeed are brilliant. Without them we couldn't have survived. Therefore, it's but natural that we should thank the one who has given us all these blessings. And he says in verse 18, and if you count God's favors, you will not be able to enumerate them. Inna Allah ghafurur rahim, la ghafurur rahim. So God's blessings are indeed numerous, and therefore we'll do well to keep looking at them, realizing the Almighty's kindness and thanking Him. Verse 90 is a mention of the basic principles of morality that the Almighty has mentioned in the Quran. This verse verse 90 of Surah Nahl is what you would find almost in all khutbahs of Friday prayers, Jummah prayer. And it's because of the fact that this verse is the basis of all morals that humans have, which they are to respect and value while living along with others. It says, "Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan wa ita'i zil qurba wa yanha anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi." Indeed, God enjoins justice, excellence in dealings, and constant financial support of relatives, and forbids obscenity, evil conduct, and oppression. He exhorts you to righteousness so that you are reminded. So that's the basic statement on morality, and we'll see that in the next surah it's described in much greater detail. Then we move on to verse 106, where the Almighty is telling us that although He wants us to be fully committed to His faith, He doesn't expect from us impossible behavior. If there are situations when the difficulty of continuing with proclaiming faith goes out of control, beyond capacity, then He allows us to do things to save our lives on the one hand and yet to still remain faithful on the other. So what He mentions is, "Man kafara billahi min ba'di imanihi." Whoever, after having had faith in God, disbelieves, "Illa man ukriha wa qalbuhu mutmainnum bil iman," except for one who is forced to renounce faith while faith is firmly placed in his heart. So that's an exception. At times you may find that if you say that you are a believer, you will be killed. So the Almighty allows to weaker believers that if that at that time, on that occasion, they apparently renounce faith while faith is firmly placed in their hearts, that's an exception. Otherwise, if somebody after having believing disbelieves, those who willingly open their hearts to disbelief upon them is God's displeasure. Then we move on to verse 123, which informs us that the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, was asked by the Almighty to follow the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Now, Abraham's religion was obviously not based on the Quran, because the Quran was revealed to the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him. So what then was his religion? It is pretty much clear that the religion of Ibrahim that the Prophet was asked to follow were the Sunnah acts, rituals, which were followed by all prophets. The formal 5 times a day prayer, the alms giving rule, law of zakat, and the ritual of Hajj and Umrah started. It was initiated by Ibrahim alayhi salam, and fasting, we know the Quran tells us, was also given to prescribed for the earlier people, and there were many other rituals which we still go through, and they are all called, described under the title of Sunnah. So here is this Quranic instruction to the Prophet that you must follow this Sunnah. It says, ثُمَّ أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَيْكَ أَنِ اتَّبِعْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. Then we reveal to you, O Prophet, that follow Abraham's way, who was completely focused and he wasn't amongst the polytheists. So that's exactly what the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, did. And we are going through the same religious expectations, rituals, as were done by Ibrahim alayhi salam, with some minor changes which were needed for the later times, the way the Almighty has arranged for things to be a little different now. But by and large, these Sunnah practices are the practices which were followed by all prophets. The last of the prophets, may God's mercy be on him, he arranged these practices to be in their pristine original form once again, and he then followed them himself and required all believers to follow them, which they did. And when they left this world, the next generation was already doing them. And like the Quran, the Sunnah too, therefore, has come to us in a form which is absolutely pristine, original, the way it was given. Verse 125 is another important verse of Surah An-Nahl, which is mentioning the most important principle that needs to be followed whenever God's message is to be preached, delivered to others. The Quran says, Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah. Invite others towards the path of your Lord with wisdom, effective instructions. And if you were to debate with them in the best manner. Indeed, your Lord knows the best those who have strayed from his way, and he knows the best those who deserve to be guided. So if you have taken the task of inviting people towards the path of your Lord, be absolutely sure that when you're doing it, you are being wise, you are being polite, and you are not offending people. You are not doing it in a way that you are stern, and through your behavior, you are drawing people away from you. Then we begin the next surah, which is Surah Bani Israel, and this surah is partnering with Surah An-Nahl to form another pair. The first verse of this surah describes the journey of the Prophet from the holy mosque in Kaaba to the one in Jerusalem. It says, Subhanallazi asra bi'abdihi laylam min al-masjid al-haram ila al-masjid al-aqsa. Free from all weaknesses is the one who took his servant in one night from the sacred mosque to the distant one, whose surroundings we made blessed. That is, the mosque in Jerusalem is located in a place which, unlike in the case of Mecca, is a fertile soil. And this journey was undertaken so that we show him our signs. That's what the Quran says. Signs of what? Signs of the all-important decision of the Almighty to transfer the status of Bani Israel, being the representatives of the Almighty's message, to Bani Ismail. So the center of the Bani Israel was Jerusalem. That's where the masjid was, that's where the prophets came. And now it's the center of, call it spiritual focus, excellence, attention for Bani Ismail was Mecca, the holy mosque, the Kaaba. And this journey was required for the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, to be undertaken so that this formal announcement is made and it becomes clear to everyone that the transfer of status has taken place. Verse 60 of this surah clarifies that it was a roya, a spiritual experience in the form of a dream, so that all the great visuals that the Prophet was required to experience were made clear to him, and he saw, he remembered, and he delivered, communicated to others whatever he went through. Verses 4 and verses 9 are talking about the communication that the Almighty had with the children of Israel, because obviously it was an important occasion. Now that the children of Israel are being informed that through God's decision, this whole idea of God's message getting delivered to the rest of the mankind, this is now being transferred to the children of Ismail. So it was an important occasion for some important parts of the history of the children of Israel to be delivered, so that they, as well as the next ummah, the next people who were given this responsibility, they both should learn from those experiences. So the Almighty says, we had communicated to the children of Israel of our decision that you will certainly cause mischief on earth. Despite having God's message with you, you will cause mischief on earth. And then you show haughtiness twice. You will show your arrogance for the status that the Almighty had given you. And you will, as a consequence, be punished. So, the Almighty is clarifying that this status that people have from God of being His representatives is not for them to enjoy and to feel comfortable that no matter what, they're going to stay with it and would be the best and the chosen people of the Almighty. He says that if you perform well, you will be blessed by the Almighty, supported by Him. But if you perform poorly, then the Almighty would punish you as well. This is what happened to the children of Israel, and this is what the Almighty wanted the children of Ismail, the newly appointed Ummah, to also know and be very clear about, that it's not that this blessing is going to stay with you no matter what your behavior. After having clarified this important understanding through the mention of the history of the children of Israel, the Almighty mentions in verse 9, Inna hazal Qur'ana yahdi lillati hiya aqwam. It is this Quran which guides towards the path that is straight. So it's not just a mention for the children of Ismail, but the children of Israel are also told that if you want now, from now on, to be in the good books of the Almighty, you will have to follow His book. And while describing the history of the children of Israel, the Almighty talked about those incidents, those periods in the history wherein they were punished because of their misdeeds. And they were punished by some military dictators, tyrant rulers, who weren't pious people. They were like the kings are. But they had the military might with which they crushed the children of Israel and subjected them to very difficult times. And the Quran describes those people as Ibadal lana uli basin shadid. They were our servants with military might. In other words, the Almighty is giving this message that if people who have got God's message do not behave properly, they are going to be punished by the Almighty through humans, through people with military might. And God would describe them His own servants, not because they were pious, they are pious, but because of the fact that they will be used by the Almighty as His tools to inflict His punishment on those people who, although were chosen for good purposes from amongst the progeny of Abraham, yet they didn't behave properly, and therefore they were deserving of the punishment that they went through at the hands of these enemies. Then we have the mention, the detailed mention of the principles, rules of morality that were briefly described in the previous surah in verse 19. Here is a detailed mention of those principles from verses 22 to 39 of Surah Bani Israel, which are often described as the 10 commandments of the Quran, wherein the Almighty exhorts believers to make sure that they do not worship anyone except God. and they be good to their parents. And that the wealth that the Almighty has given them, they should use it judiciously and spend some part of it on their poor relatives and other poor people of the society. That they should never come close to zina, extramarital sex, that they would not take anyone's life, and that they will, while measuring and weighing, they will be honest. They will never come close to the wealth of the orphans and the vulnerable people. They will abide by the contracts that they have undertaken. They will not look at the privacy of others, would not look at the areas where they do have no business to look at, to peep into. And finally, they will not be arrogant. So these 10 commandments are the important areas of morality which, if they are violated, they constitute what are called the major sins, kabair al-ithm. So they have been described, and then we find that hijrah, migration, is talked about in this surah. The Almighty says that these children of, these people of Mecca, they are about to drive you from the land, to evict you from it, and then they won't remain therein after you've left. If they will force you to leave this city, then they should be absolutely clear that they too would not survive for very long. Why? Sunnata man qad arsalna qablaka min rusulina. That is our established sunnah policy that we followed for those messengers to whom we had sent before you. God has some firm policies, inflexible, that are followed under all circumstances. And one of those policies is that if his messenger is rejected by a nation and is opposed so strongly that he and his companions are forced to leave the city where he is living and preaching to the disbelievers, if he is forced to leave the city, then they would not survive. So the Almighty is referring to this sunnah policy of his, and is telling the people of Mecca that if that happens, then your days are numbered, because it's our policy. Wala tajidu li sunnatina tahwila, and you would never find our sunnah altering, changing. God always follows his policies. He is true to the commitment that he has made. At the end of the surah, Surah Bani Israel, what we find is that God is mentioning the fact that when you pray to him, when you approach him, it doesn't matter which name you call him by. Qulidullah awidur Rahman. Call him by his name Allah, or call him by his name Rahman. Whichever name you call him by, all good names are his. They belong to him. So don't get into this unnecessary debate as to which name is God's real name. All good names are God's names. So God wants you to invite others to the right path without indulging in unnecessary debate about matters which are not of any significance. So that's what he mentions, and then towards the very last of the surah, he says, Qul alhamdulillah. Say all praise and expressions of gratefulness are for God, Allah. Allazi lam yattakhiz walada, the one who didn't have any progeny, any son. Walam yakul lahu sharikun fil mulk. And there is nobody who is supporting him in his kingdom, in running the affairs of his kingdom. Walam yakul lahu waliyum min az-zul. And there is no friend of him who is needed at times of weakness. He has no weakness. So he has got no friends that would be needed for that purpose. وَكَبِّرْهُ takbira, and you glorify him befittingly, as much as is possible. May the Almighty enable us to understand His book and its message properly, and may He enable us to follow it as best as we can.